Olá, muito boa tarde. Estamos dando início a mais uma mesa redonda do CIET, EMPET, ESUD, ESUD 2022. Eu sou Ana Paula, eu sou uma mulher de 38 anos, parda, com cabelos pretos encaracolados, olhos castanhos, uso óculos, estou com uma blusa branca florida e aqui ao fundo a sala onde eu trabalho, aqui na UFSCar. E estou aqui para mediar essa mesa intitulada Aprendizagem Invertida e o Desafio da Educação Online, com o prazer de contar com a fala aqui do professor Dr. Robert Talbert. O professor Robert atua no Departamento de Matemática da Grand Valley State University, em Michigan, nos Estados Unidos, e veio aqui hoje para comentar um pouco com a gente sobre esse tema da aprendizagem invertida. Então, eu vou passar a palavra agora para o professor Robert. Welcome, professor.
Welcome, and thank you, Anna, for hosting this. And it's very, very nice to be with all of you here in the room. I would very much like to be with you in Brazil. I was in Brazil, if you've watched the video that I prepared for you. I was in Brazil 2 years ago, just before the pandemic really broke upon us. And I had such a lovely time, and I loved your country, and it would be my pleasure to come back and visit you. Unfortunately, we couldn't make it work this time, but maybe next time as well. But it's great to be with you this afternoon from my home office here in Michigan. And I can see it's a very beautiful day in Brazil as well, outside Anna's window. I'm glad you're here. I know it is a busy time of the academic year for all of us, and I really appreciate your spending time to take some time to really immerse yourselves in educational innovation to better serve your students in Brazil, and my students as well here in the United States. I believe will benefit from this discussion as well. What I would like to do today with you for the next hour or hour and a half is I would like to briefly go through to hit the main points of the talk that I created for you. There's a video for it. In case it's been a few days since you've seen it, I'd like to go through and just touch on the main points of what I would like to discuss with you today. And that is how flipped learning, a very powerful educational innovation that's grown up in the last 20 years, and online learning, another powerful education innovation that has become quite important for us since the pandemic struck, can mutually support each other, and what we can learn about quality online education from flipped learning, and likewise what flipped learning can learn from online education. I'm not familiar with your particular situations, whether you teach much online or what your familiarity is with flipped learning. So I'll be asking you some questions through the chat as we go through. And I wish my Portuguese were such that I could speak with you directly, but that's a lot of learning I still need to do to get to that point. So I'm going to pull up the slides if I could. I'm not sure if Ian needs to do this. The slide, thank you very much. And I'm just going to very quickly run through the major points of the talk that I recorded for you. Not all of it, and I'm going to skip some slides too, but I just want to touch on the main ideas here so we can have a basis for discussion. So what I would like to discuss with you again is how flipped learning can help us address the challenge, really should be the many challenges of online education. Again, March 2nd of 2020, this was the view outside my hotel window in Sao Paulo. March of 2020 was a momentous time, a deeply upsetting time for many of us. I was in Brazil to work with the faculty at Escola Politecnica at Universidade de Sao Paulo. They were and still are interested in transforming their engineering curriculum for students to one that's more focused on active learning. This was a typical classroom that I visited while I was there. Good instruction happening, but mostly lecture, students seated, not terribly active, and not very many students in the room. Many students, one of the biggest concerns voiced to me at that time by Escola Politecnica faculty was attendance. Attendance was dropping quite rapidly. It was very low. Oftentimes, maybe only 20%, 10% of students coming to class at any given time. And as I traveled around Sao Paulo, I began to see why that might be. Taking the metro from one end of Sao Paulo to another could take up to 2 hours. Sao Paulo is a city that's so vast. I had a hard time understanding how vast that city was. It's larger than any city in the United States, almost by a factor of 2. And students were coming to class to take exams because that was the only way those exams could be taken. But otherwise, they were wondering why they couldn't just stay home and get information from an online video source like YouTube. And so I was working with the Poli faculty to redesign their curriculum to make their learning experiences more active and more meaningful. And that involved flipped learning as well. We worked with each other, and this is a shot from the workshop we had, to design courses for active learning and flipped learning, and came up with some great ideas. And I went home on this nearly empty flight, as you could see. Having an entire row of seats to myself is something that's never happened to me. And just very briefly after I got off the plane was when our university closed down. Grand Valley State University in Michigan closed down completely for the pandemic and remained closed for the entire rest of the semester. And we learned firsthand, and I believe you did too at that time, because the same thing happened in Brazil, that online learning is not easy, especially when your courses are not necessarily designed for online learning in the first place. Ours certainly were not. We're a fairly large department at Grand Valley in the mathematics department where I teach. We have about 40 faculty, hundreds of students, thousands of students who take our classes, and almost none of those classes were designed to go online. And yet we had 10 days to turn everything around and get them to be online. And we struggled during that time. We also learned a lot too. And one of the things I honestly don't know if I mentioned this in my recorded talk, so this may be something new for you. Many of our faculty really struggled with switching to an online teaching environment. They've never taught online before. We have some fantastic mathematics faculty in our department, many of whom were coming to me. I was the chair of the department at the time, telling me that they felt like they were having to start completely over in their careers. It was like their first day of teaching. Going online, and many faculty struggle greatly with this, both professionally and even emotionally, with going online. However, some of the faculty had a very easy time with going online. And those faculty were the ones in our department who had been using flipped learning for this entire time, even before the pandemic. So I began to wonder why that was the case. And another thing that I experienced during the pandemic was an increase in the number of people from outside my university who were asking me to give them advice about flipped learning, or maybe do a workshop with them online on flipped learning. And I thought that was strange. Why would people be asking me to do a flipped learning workshop at this point in history, when obviously the real need is to learn about online learning? And I started realizing that maybe they knew something that I didn't, and that flipped learning fits the situation that we found ourselves in March 2020, and still fits now. And my main point here again is, I think flipped learning is the ideal platform for higher education for the future, and is uniquely suited to address the challenges of online and hybrid learning as we face them now. By hybrid learning, what I'm referring to is a mixture of face-to-face and online, and that can occur in a number of different ways. We are all, since the pandemic is now beginning to ease, fortunately, I believe, for now at least, we're no longer in a crisis mode when it comes to the pandemic, but we still have hybrid and online learning, and hybrid and online education is not going away anytime soon. Our students have tasted what it's like, and it really works for a certain number of our students. For my students, who many of whom are older students in their 20s and 30s as far as age goes, or perhaps they live somewhat remotely from our campus here in Western Michigan, and it is difficult for them to get into a class, to just commute back and forth when gas prices are very high here in the United States. I'm sure they are in Brazil as well. There's a real case that you can make that online and hybrid education ought to be ethically a permanent fixture in all of our universities. It's now up to us educators to make it good, to give quality online learning. And so we need to be looking for as many sources of help as we possibly can. And I really believe that flipped learning is an untapped resource for this. And those of us who do flipped learning and have been thinking about flipped learning for a while can be a great help. And here's where I'm going to ask you some questions here. I'm not totally sure how this is going to work, but I'm going to take a question that I've written out. I'm going to put it in what in my screen says private chat. And I'm going to enter this in, and I believe you should get a Portuguese version of this coming to your way and somewhere or another. If this doesn't work out, here's the question I have for you. Can you give me 3 words, either English or Portuguese, that best describe your experiences teaching during the pandemic? 3 words that best describe your teaching experience during the pandemic. I'm very curious to hear from you about this, because I know what the American experience has been like, but I'm very curious to hear what the Brazilian experience has been like in 3 words or less. Again, my Portuguese I am not fluent in Portuguese at all, but I think I might be able to pick out a few words that are close enough that I could understand a few things. So if you can just take a moment to think about that and reply in the chat what you think. While you are thinking about those words, I will share my 3 words for what best describe my teaching experience during the pandemic. It was very busy, I will say. I think all of us we found new reserves for energy, I believe, during the pandemic, or we had to. We really had to learn to expect the unexpected in many ways. My faculty colleagues who told me that it was like starting completely over as a teacher were really on to something I put there. desperation, disorganization. It was certainly a very confusing time, Laura. I completely agree with you on this. We had to basically relearn what teaching was all about from first principles during the pandemic times. For many, desperation is what I see. For many, desperation was really where they found themselves. So some of these fantastic teachers who I greatly look up to as professionals were sending me messages saying things like, "I don't think I can go on much longer." It was a scary time to be a department chair, because as a department chair, I have to look after not only the business of the department, but also the well-being of the faculty who are in the department. And it was tough. It was tough, and we had to find new ways to do everything. I'm going to invite you to continue to think about that. And if you have something you want to share, please go ahead and add it to the chat, and it will pop up, I believe, in my mentions here as well. I'm going to continue on with just the recap of the talk here. What is this? So the challenges that we found in online education, I feel like there are many of them, and this list is not exhaustive, but it was very difficult to think about active learning during the pandemic. It was difficult to work without a physical environment during the pandemic. And even at one point, we came back to something like face-to-face teaching, except we had to socially distance and stay 10 feet apart. And that had major implications for what goes on in a classroom. If we were using group work, for example, working together collaboratively, we couldn't just get people up next to each other. It was a strange way, a constraint that we had to deal with in physical environment. Assessing students was very difficult, especially in an online environment. In online education, there are issues with academic dishonesty and cheating that need to be taken care of. And most of all, the human connection is a major challenge. Having students work together while not actually being in the same place at the same time, it can very easily become a dehumanizing experience. And so making online learning human is a major challenge. And this is an ongoing challenge that all of us face. And I would like to briefly touch on how flipped learning addresses all of those. Well, first of all, I should say, by active learning, what I mean is instructional activities that involve students in doing things and thinking about what they are doing. That's a classic definition of active learning, especially the part about thinking about what they are doing is very important, not just simply acting, but thinking carefully about what they are learning, what they're doing to learn. I like this diagram here as well, which is from a new paper that came out during the pandemic. To understand what this diagram is saying, look on the left, and you will see traditional lecture-based learning. Everything goes through the teacher, and the teacher digests it all and then gives it to the students. That's what traditional learning looks like. That model where the student depends on everything for the teacher just really no longer works in today's internet connected and enabled age. Instead, what we should be aiming for is what's on the right. Okay, it's a complex network of people, data, models, tools, and all of these things interact with each other. And this is what active learning really looks like when it's enacted in a classroom. It's called the construction of understanding ecosystem. And I'm not sure if that translates well into Portuguese or not, but the diagram is all you need to see here. The student interacts with the teacher still, but also interacts with peers and interacts with all the data, models, tools, and practices of the domain that they are learning. And that's what active learning looks like. And this is what students, I believe, really want today, especially in the post-pandemic era that we're entering into. I'm greatly hopeful we are post-pandemic at this point. They are looking for experiences in learning that are really meaningful, that are connected in with other people, where they really believe that they're interacting with the thing that they are learning. This is what they want, and I don't believe that students are willing to settle for anything less at this point. Flipped learning, on the other hand, scooting through some slides here. Where does flip learning come into this? Well, flip learning, in my view, and I'm not sure how this compares to your view, but here is my view on this. And this is from my book on flip learning that I published in 2017. In traditional learning, what we have is we have very low level cognitive tasks taking place during what I call group space, the class meeting, if you will. And all of the upper levels of cognitive activities are left for students to do on their own by themselves. This leads to a number of problems with learning and understanding. And flip learning sees these problems and does this. It takes the lowest level tasks and says, we don't really need to spend time in a group talking about facts or data, okay? That can be made available to you in an online format, such as a video or a data set that is posted online that you interact with prior to a group space experience. And we can take all of lecturing, for example, and move it completely outside the class meeting into the students' individual spaces by, for example, posting lectures to YouTube, where students still get the lectures, they still get everything that they believe they want from lecturing, but it's better because it can be slowed down, it can be played on a phone, it can be watched while you're on the metro traversing across Sao Paulo. But class time is special. Class time, we have greatly learned, I hope we have learned, that class time is rare, it's special, and it needs to be treated with respect. And the way that you do that is to focus it on these two green parts of Bloom's taxonomy, which say apply and analyze. Taking the basic information that you learn from just facts and data and applying it to interesting things. That is what class time is for, according to flip learning. And so flip learning privileges active learning. Okay, I'm going to back this up to here. Flip learning takes group space, which is class meetings for us, or it could be discussion board activities for an asynchronous class, or it could be a synchronous meeting like we're having right now, and privileges it towards active learning. It's specifically designed to be active learning. So this has a natural application into online education as well, because the individual space work about facts and data, that is very applicable to an online situation, because we have tools for hosting video, we have tools for hosting files. It's very easy to get that factual information to students in an online setting. And the tools for doing active learning and group work are better than they've ever been. I mean, witness what we're doing right now. I am sitting here in Grand Rapids, Michigan, and you are sitting there in Sao Paulo, Brazil, or near Sao Paulo, Brazil. We're a 12-hour airplane flight apart, and yet we're having this congress where a lot of the interesting things are getting done. So this was not easy to do as early as 10 years ago, but now the technology is quite seamless. Good cameras, good microphones, good software. It all works in our favor. I have a question from Laura here, and I'm going to read it off. They say, about active learning, usually there are some students that expect the traditional learning. How can professors motivate them to test and learn in active pedagogy? Laura, that's a great question. And I'm going to answer this like the way that I answer to my own students who fall into this situation. Many students are used to getting lectures in their classes, and this is what they know. This is how they've done school. The one thing that I found helpful for motivating students to become active learners is just to simply ask them two questions. Okay, two questions. In my classes, we do this on the first day of every class. I ask my students, tell me something that you're good at doing. Tell me something that you're good at doing. This could be something academic, like calculus or history, or it could be something that's completely unrelated to school, like snowboarding or baking cookies, whatever the case may be. Everybody is good at least something. So find it and tell me what you're good at doing. First of all, it helps me get to know my students. And second of all, it sets me up for question number 2, which is, how did you get good at that thing? How did you get good at how did you become good at the thing that you said you're good at doing? If you're an excellent snowboarder, how did you become an excellent snowboarder? If you bake fantastic cookies. How did you learn how to bake fantastic cookies? And the answer that I get is never lecture. My students who are very good at snowboarding never took a class on snowboarding. And my students who are excellent at baking never had a fantastic lecture about baking. They just learned baking. How? By doing baking, by doing snowboarding. Active learning, the point that I try to get across to students is that active learning is our default mode for learning anything that's of any value to us. It's how we have learned everything in our lives that matters, is through active participation in the thing that we're learning and about thinking about what we're doing. We learn by doing things, and that is a fundamental fact of human neurobiology. The synapses in our brains do not spontaneously create themselves when we hear somebody say something. It's always about doing things. Okay, so if a student really wants to learn and be engaged in what they're learning, and I really believe students do, I don't think students want to show up in a class and just be bored. I told the story in the video about my 16-year-old daughter who had this very situation. Students do not want this. They may think they do, but they really don't in the end. They really want to be active and active participants, in the learning process. And that's what we're going to do in the class. From that point forward, when students understand that everything that's important in their lives that they learned and learned by active learning, and so the way we're setting up the class is to give as much time to active learning as possible. I have very few issues with students believing me that this is going to be good for them. And anyway, that's an exercise you can do with your students that takes maybe 10 minutes. It helps students get to know each other, you get to know your students, and I think it helps get the what we call buy-in, the trust, I think, towards what we're trying to do in the class. So that's what flipped learning does. I mean, it gives us as much time as possible for active learning in the class. The class time is hard fought. We will never take class time for granted again after COVID. At least I'm not going to. If we're going to work so hard to have in-person class time, we had better put it to good use. And I think flipped learning does that. And online learning can adopt the same model very easily. It's a perfect place to do flipped learning. So flipped learning really addresses this issue of active learning. Another issue it addresses is physical environments. We didn't even have physical environments during the first part of the pandemic. Everyone was online. Although everyone worked from a physical environment, whether it was their apartment or I guess that was the only, or their kitchen. This, by the way, was another classroom at University of Sao Paulo. And even when we are in a physical environment, the environment itself can either help or inhibit active learning. In flipped learning, though, this is another slide from the talk. In flipped learning, we don't really assume anything about a physical environment. In fact, most of the pre-class work that we do in the individual space, by putting lectures online and by putting data and other documentation online for students to consume and work with before class, we're basically saying you can do this anywhere. And so it's a perfect use case for online education, where perhaps the entire class is distributed throughout the web. So flipped learning also addresses this issue of physical space. It decouples physical space from the learning process, and that is an extremely important thing moving forward. Pandemic or no pandemic, I believe that we can never assume that we'll ever be able to meet with students in a physical space again. Perhaps we will. So far, we've had fairly good luck with that, at least at Grand Valley, throughout this whole academic year. But who knows? I mean, maybe there could be another variant and another winter surge coming up, where winter for us is right around the corner. And maybe we have to go back online again. No one knows what the future holds. And so we can't assume that physical space is a non-negotiable element of how we teach. Fortunately for us, flipped learning gives us a model for using physical space to its best effect, but also getting around it if we need to. I showed you in the video a couple of rooms that we designed for this, for physical space, like this one here, which is a beautiful room on our campus where It's designed to have, as you can see, these large projector screens in it for students who are remote. So students in a classroom like this can be in the room or be remote at the same time. And we're working on models of teaching where that students can be anywhere they wish. They can be in the room, they could be across the country, they could be in Brazil, and then still come in and take the class with the rest of the class just as if they were in the room. Another issue that flipped learning helps address is assessment. Assessment is a very tricky subject in online education because of the specter of cheating. In fact, though, I want to make sure this gets. I remind you of this, that cheating is not necessarily any more common in online courses than it is in face-to-face courses. In fact, this study found that it was more or less exactly as common to cheat in an online course as it is in a face-to-face course. That might be surprising to some of you. I think the assumption is that when you're online, students will just simply cheat. They'll look things up on the internet and so forth. My response to that would be, if a student can pass your test by simply looking things up on the internet's not the problem. The test is the problem. What we are actually testing is therefore the problem. And so this slide sums it up. The lower you are on this model called Bloom's taxonomy, if you're down here at the lower levels where it's all about facts and remembering things and understanding things, it's very easy to cheat in those situations, because all you have to do is look things up on the internet. But the higher up you go, the top pinnacle here says create, this says evaluate. The more high level a cognitive task gets, the harder it is to cheat on it effectively. That's been my experience. And so I really believe that you cannot any longer give assessments in a class that are fundamentally about remembering or understanding things. Those are important, but they just simply cannot be assessed any longer because it's too easy to cheat on them. Instead, our entire mode of assessment needs to shift up the pyramid. So we are only assessing and grading things that are about applying, analyzing, evaluating, and creating things. We call those authentic assessments. They are really just simply assessing or testing students' abilities to work with concepts that real human beings in their jobs work with. Flipped learning gives us a way of doing that because it focuses class time on this middle third of Bloom's taxonomy, like we said. And so you assess in that top level, and that's exactly where the group space happens in a flipped environment. We're all working on those tasks together, and that's what we assess. And finally, flipped learning helps with human connections as well. It can be quite dehumanizing to be in an online course. If you've ever taken an online course, you know this. But again, what this notion of self-determination theory says, that intrinsic motivation to do a task that comes from just simple enjoyment of the task itself, depends on three things. Your belief, this says autonomy, which refers to your belief that you are in control of your learning process. Competency is what this says, and that means you believe that you are getting better at what you're learning the more you learn it. And then the final one says connectedness, and that has to do with, I am not learning alone. I am with other people, and I'm forming human connections as I learn. The very fact that flipped learning doesn't do this, we call this face-to-face learning, but I'm not sure any one person's face here is actually facing another person's face. They're all looking straight ahead at a PowerPoint deck. But flipped learning takes the group space and it really treats it as group space. In a group space environment, we're focusing on more difficult tasks. We're doing them actively. And so there's a natural human connection that takes place in flipped learning that simply is not guaranteed in traditional learning models here. And so if online learning can look to flipped learning as a way of incorporating more rich and more diverse human relationships in the active learning that is now much more prevalent in group space meetings. So those are the four main challenges that I pointed out about online learning. I saw a few more words coming in about your experiences with teaching online: frustrating, terrified. Our students were just as terrified and just as frustrated, by the way. I think we probably know this. We were all in a situation where we didn't know what was happening. We didn't know what tomorrow was going to bring or how this was going to work, because there was no precedent for what we did. And yet, I think we did all right, I believe. Don't you? I feel like the more we did it, the more we did online learning, we learned things because we ourselves are professional learners as educators, and we kept our eyes focused on students and listened to them. And to the extent that we did those things, we got better at the whole process. And so I'm going to end my slide deck here. It is already kind of done. And so flipped learning, I believe, is the right thing to look at if we're trying to make online learning as good as possible for our students. And I believe that online learning can be made very good for our students. Online learning is not necessarily the best choice for every student, but there are a lot of students who would be very well served by having excellent, outstanding, world-class online and hybrid education in every university that we touch, that we're employed at or associated with. And I think that we have a good reason to be hopeful that we can look at flipped learning and make that a reality for our students and really serve them well. That's my part of this. We have a great deal of time now, more time than I am used to by far, which is fantastic for your questions. And I'd love to talk with you some more about anything that's on your mind about this.
Thank you very much, Professor. Foi muito bom, muito obrigada pela sua fala. A gente vai abrir para as questões agora sobre esse tema que interessa tanto para a gente. Eu estava observando lá no chat da transmissão dublada, que tem uma perguntinha, eu vou falar aqui a pergunta, que a gente acho que não vai conseguir trazer no...
We are now going to open for Q&A.
E é o seguinte, a Luciana está perguntando: existem ferramentas, plugins em plataformas como Moodle que são recursos contra a cola, como Safe Exam Browser, mas tenho minhas dúvidas se os alunos não dão um jeito de burlar. Ela está comentando sobre a questão da cola nas avaliações.
Is there a way to cheat on Moodle? There's a way to cheat on anything. And so any student that's sufficiently motivated to cheat will find a way to do it. There's no such thing as preventing cheating. I think we should be clear about that. I get asked this question a lot. First of all, thank you for the question. I hear this question a lot. How do I prevent students from cheating on my tests or whatever the case may be? And my answer is there's really no way to completely prevent students from cheating unless you're willing to set up a police surveillance state in your class with online proctoring systems and cameras in their rooms. And some of these, there are these systems out there to prevent cheating on Moodle or attempt to prevent cheating on Moodle that involve having additional cameras put into a student's room that are actually pointing at them when they're using Moodle. And to me, that causes more problems than it solves. I think the way to prevent cheating on any situation, whether it's in a learning management system software or anything of the sort, is to simply give better assessments. When we give online assessments that are all about facts and memorization and rote mechanics, this is asking for students to cheat on them, and so they will, and they will absolutely do it, because there's a little calculation that goes on in the mind of every student when they have an assessment about, what's the likelihood of being caught if I simply cheated on this. Now, the students often have a pretty strong moral compass and will not attempt this, but some will, and all of them will be tempted. I would be tempted too, to be honest. But if I'm working on something that is meaningful to me, where I feel a personal connection to what I'm doing, and it's interesting and it's creative, and I don't want to miss out on what I'm learning through this assessment, and I'm far less likely to cheat. So yeah, students can cheat on Moodle, but the question I think is like, what are we giving students to do, and could that be improved? And then I could just put it on Moodle, or I could put it on my LMS, or put it anywhere, and I would feel better about student performance on that. So again, my short answer to that would be yes, students can cheat on Moodle. The way to kind of keep that from happening is just to make sure we're giving students work that they want to do.
Great. Very good. Muito bem. Pessoal, vamos ver se o pessoal aqui no chat está colocando mais comentários, mais perguntas. Eu vi que a Laura colocou um pedido aqui. Professor?
It's a references and articles about this concept of flipped learning based on flipping Bloom's taxonomy. I write at my blog. It's rtalbert.org. We're serving up some more questions. I'm just going to go grab a link to an article that I wrote about that very subject. And so if you give me just a moment while you give me some more questions, I will go search that up.
Eu achei bem interessante também essa articulação que o professor fez entre a taxonomia de Bloom e a aprendizagem invertida, e a gente observa assim, a aprendizagem invertida é muito ligada com a aprendizagem ativa, né? As bases são a aprendizagem ativa, e aí me surgiu uma dúvida, se os professores na universidade onde o senhor trabalha, você comentou, né, que no começo tiveram dificuldade com o online, mas se antes eles já tinham essa predileção por metodologias ativas, pela aprendizagem ativa. É isso que eu gostaria de saber.
Oh, certainly, yes. Active learning as a concept. First of all, I just want to mention that I've placed a link in the chat. I'm not sure how this gets out to all of you, but it's to answer Laura's question about flipped learning and Bloom's taxonomy. And to answer the question now, but active learning as a concept, I mean, it's been around as long as human learning itself has been around. The definition that I gave that has been active learning has, over the last 30 years, I would say, 30 to 35 years, has become more of a field of study as well as an organized concept that is being implemented in the classrooms. And so that's been around for quite a while. I first came into contact with it myself when I was in graduate school, earning my PhD 30 years ago. I was looking for better ways to teach my calculus students, and someone told me about active learning. I thought, well, that sounds fantastic. And so my department, at least at Grand Valley State, is deeply committed to active learning, because in mathematics, we really believe what I think is the truth, that you really can't truly learn mathematics by just simply listening to a person talk or watching a person talk about mathematics. You don't really know it until you just get the piece of paper out or stand up to a whiteboard like I have behind me here and just simply work on things. And working on things together is better than working on things alone. And so this is where, and there's been 30 years of research backing this up. In the talk, I gave a reference to one very important paper, and you can go back to the video and see the reference. It's to a paper by Freeman, a team of researchers led by Freeman. It was published in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2014. And it's a very short paper. It's only 6 pages long, but it is an analysis of 225 prior studies about active learning in the science, technology, engineering, and mathematics disciplines. And for my mind, all discussion about whether active learning is a good idea ends with that paper. It absolutely definitively establishes active learning as the best way to teach students in those subjects, and there's no more question about it in my mind. So I would just highly recommend all of you who are here listening to this to go read that paper. It is in English. I don't know if there's a Portuguese translation or But even just the diagrams, the figures in the paper will be enough for you. You will learn, and then the reference section at the end of that paper, of course, contains all of these 225 other studies. And so that's in itself almost an entire self-contained college curriculum about active learning. I highly, highly recommend before this week is done, drop what you're doing and go read that paper.
Thank you. Vamos ver aqui, eu não encontrei mais nenhum comentário. Acho que aqui tem um comentário outro da Laura. Vamos lá. Professor.
Professor.
Yes, another good one from Laura here. Considering your experience in Brazil, what do Brazilian universities need to do in order to reach this necessary infrastructure? First of all, I want to give I've been very. Let me back up a second. I'm so enthusiastic about Brazilian higher education that it's difficult for me to know where to begin with this the answer on this, because my experience with Brazilian higher education has been that you folks in Brazil are absolutely ready to do something different. I can't say that, unfortunately, about all my American colleagues, where we have the infrastructure, but not necessarily the heart for it. But I feel like when I've worked with Brazilian educators, you folks are hungry for something different. And it's been such a pleasure to work with Brazilian educators over the last 5 years or so when I first came into contact. And all countries in South America I've had the privilege of working with are just on fire to move towards active learning. So in terms of the question, what infrastructure needs to be in place? Thankfully, there's not much in the way of, say, physical infrastructure. I mean, I mentioned physical space in the talk, and I showed some Brazilian classrooms, but active learning can take place anywhere. Okay, if you have the heart for it, if you have the will and the desire to do it, you've got what you need already. Okay, I can't speak to topics such as promotion, tenure, professional incentives, for example. Here in the United States, one of the main barriers towards adopting active learning more readily is that we have systems of tenure, promotion, and our salary adjustments from year to year as higher educators are often not tied to teaching effectiveness. They're tied to things like research productivity and bringing in grants from the outside. I can't speak to the situation in Brazil because I don't know it, but if there is a way to work within your universities to focus those incentives on teaching excellence and on the kinds of teaching that takes place in your classroom, by all means seize upon that, because that is a major barrier to more faculty who want to do active learning but aren't doing active learning because they feel like they're going to be professionally at risk for it. I feel like to pull off the kinds of active learning I'm speaking of, there really isn't much there that needs to be in place other than support structures for faculty, training for faculty. I mean, that's why I was in Brazil, was to train faculty. And so if you can learn how to do active learning well, I feel like that you could be the infrastructure. You could be the person on your campus who is driving the conversation and the adoption of active learning more and more and more by being that local expert. Build communities of practice in your universities around this, and you will see a lot of things take shape very, very quickly. And you'll figure out what other sorts of physical things like digital infrastructure, internet access, the way you arrange your classrooms, that kind of thing can happen next. Okay, but really where it all starts is the human element. It starts with you. Okay, so if you're listening to this right now, you should consider yourselves to be a catalyst, like a change agent, someone who makes things happen at your university. People will look to you, and you'll be the person that makes this stuff really take off. I'm very excited about this, as you can tell. I see another question here in the chat. You're a professor in the math department. How is this dialogue different between research in mathematics and education in our department? That's a good question. Our department's a little unusual in this respect that we have both mathematicians and math education specialists in the same department. So our department is both math and math education. And so there's been historically a really rich interplay between our mathematicians, of which I'm one, and the people who are specialists in math education. We all listen to each other and talk with each other and greatly respect each other. In other departments that I've met, there is sometimes, unfortunately, a lack of dialogue because some people who are, say, pure research physicists, for example, in the physics department, there's a rich history and tradition of great physics education research in the literature that often doesn't make it to the physicists in the physics department. So the dialogue again. How does it work? Well, it really begins with a person, and I'm going to go back to the answer that I gave a minute ago. That every one of you who is listening to this talk right now, you could be the key to engaging your colleagues in this kind of dialogue. If you feel like your colleagues need to hear a message about active learning, I would just suggest that you are the messenger. And it always begins in every department I've ever worked with, whether it's a political science department or some other math department elsewhere, or the engineering school at the School of Polytechnica. The true progress always begins with a person, okay, a single person who has their heart in the right place, who has a good knowledge of pedagogy, of how the classroom teaching should be done, and good experience with doing it, being a bridge between all this research about active learning over here and all the day-to-day practical teaching considerations that your colleagues have to do. Some person has to be in the gap to bridge that. And I really believe that could be you. And everywhere I've been, it's always been a person that does this.
Oi? Voltei. Ok. Muito bom. Muito boas respostas.
I think Anna is offline. We're having some internet difficulties. I think Anna is offline.
Acho que a Ana está offline.
I think Anna...
This is a place where I really wish I knew more Portuguese.
Oi, pessoal, desculpe. Pequeno problema de internet aqui. Muito bom, muito boas as respostas, muito boas as perguntas. Eu não sei se a gente tem mais algum comentário, eu não vi mais nenhum. Se não for abusar muito do professor, eu gostaria de saber, eu fiquei curiosa para entender assim, se ele poderia dar um exemplo de como que você implementa o flipped classroom, a aprendizagem invertida. Você poderia dar um exemplo para a gente, contar um pouco como é que você faz, que ambiente virtual você utiliza, que momento você vai para o virtual, que momento você vai para o presencial? Queria ouvir um pouco da sua experiência, rapidamente.
Sure. I can just talk about the class I'm teaching right now, actually. So this class is a course on discrete structures for computer science majors. It's a math class, but it's all computer science students who are taking it. It's a fully face-to-face class, but it is flipped and leverages a lot of the technology that an online class would use. In fact, it's a bit of an outgrowth of the way that I taught a similar class during the pandemic when we were online half the time. So it's flipped in the sense that students get first contact with new ideas, a new topic, prior to coming to class. And the way this works is when we're encountering a new topic in the course, I will assemble a package of materials together. Sometimes it's all videos, sometimes it's a piece of a textbook, sometimes it's something I might write up, or a video that I find on YouTube that's effective, or sometimes it's some kind of website where you can play with things, manipulate data. Anyway, any sort of resource that I can find that will help students get a good first look at a topic. And I'll give this to them, and I package it together with a little document of exercises, and then tell them, before class on Monday, I want you to go through and watch these videos, read this website, and play with this website, and then go to this form and work out the exercises that are there and submit them. And it submits it to me online through a Google document, and I can read through that document right before class to see the general status and understanding of my students. The exercises are in a Google form, and so it puts it into a spreadsheet, and I can just look through the spreadsheet and see if there are any major trouble spots we need to talk about. Often there are not. That's graded, by the way, on completeness and effort only. All students have to do is turn that form in on time and answer all the questions. We don't grade that one on correctness because it's their first touch, their first look at new ideas, and so we're not, expecting a lot of deep understanding at this point. And class time basically starts where that form leaves off. I could go into the details here, but it gets fairly technical because this is a computer science class. I don't want to. I'm assuming we're not all computer scientists here in the room. But we will do a brief, when we start class, the first 5 minutes of class are spent doing a brief overview of any questions or issues that came up from this preparatory assignment. And then we jump straight into active learning tasks. And students know that we're going to jump straight into these active learning tasks after we have a brief time of questions and answers. And if they don't prepare, they're going to be really lost when we get into the active learning stuff. And that is not a comfortable place to be. And so I don't get a lot of pushback on this because the students can get help. They can ask questions on the forum. They can ask me questions in email. And so the active learning tasks can look like a lot of different things. I use an online whiteboarding tool called Miro. I'm going to put the link for that in the chat in case you want to check it out, Miro.com. I don't endorse this. I'm not like a paid endorser here, but it's a whiteboarding tool that's used for corporate training sessions and brainstorm design sprint workshops. I found it to be extremely helpful in teaching online classes, and I started using it in my face-to-face classes too, and students really love using it. It's a whiteboarding tool where students can work in different places on the whiteboard, and we can see what people are working on, and we can zoom in and out to different people's boards, and it's a really fantastic tool, even though we're all in person. So we work actively on those apply and analyze tasks for 45 minutes in the class, and then when it's time for class to be over, we spend a little bit of time discussing what went on. During the active learning tasks, I'm circulating throughout the room. Students are at tables working together. We're in one of those nice rooms like you saw in the video slides where all the tables are on wheels and there's lots of whiteboarding space in the room, and it's very easy to move around and flow back and forth. And so there's a lot of discussion and a lot of talking and movement that takes place in small groups during the class session. We wrap things up at the end of the class session by just simply asking for questions and pulling out the main ideas and discussing, summing things up. And after that, outside of class, after that, students have some certain kinds of problem sets that they work on their own time, and that is done individually. And so the infrastructure we're using, we use Blackboard for, someone mentioned Moodle a while ago. We use Blackboard, it's kind of the same thing. All of my handouts and so forth are either Google Docs or Word documents that are just online, and so I can give out links to them, and it's really easy. And we use Miro, like I said, for our whiteboarding tool. what's interesting about this setup for me is that if a student cannot make it to the class meeting, it's very easy for them to participate anyway from a remote position. And this is, I think, the hybrid sort of pedagogy that I think we're moving toward as higher education in general. That room has cameras in it that can zoom in and follow the person who's talking. And there's also really good microphones mounted in the ceiling in that room. So the person who is coming in on a Zoom call, I always go into the classroom and I start up a Zoom meeting in the classroom. And so it's being recorded and the cameras are pointed into the classroom. And so a student, if they can't be physically present, can join the Zoom meeting, just like you're joining this meeting now. And they can see the students in the room, they can see me, they can read the whiteboard. And the tools we use in the class are electronic, and so students can pull up the whiteboard that their group happens to be working on and actually work with their group while the group in the class is working on it. And so it's really very much just almost like being in the room, except you're not in the room. I've had to do this several times with students who get sick, even without COVID. We don't want people who are sick coming to class anymore. For good reason. And so students who are sick will just stay home and get on the Zoom call, and they don't miss a thing. And it's been a really interesting experience. I would love to explore further how that might happen. And so that's kind of how it works. And every day is like that. There's pre-class work to prepare for it. It's very simple to get done. It's very failure tolerant. All you have to do is finish it on time and do every problem. You don't have to get it all right. And then you show up to class to build on what it was you did outside of class, and you do it with each other. You do it with friends, and that makes it a much more meaningful experience for students, I think. So that's the short. It didn't feel short, but that was the short version of it. I can share more if anybody's interested.
That's great. Thank you very much, Professor Roberts. Gente, muito bom. Gostaria de agradecer muito ao professor Roberts pela presença aqui nessa mesa de hoje. Como não temos mais comentários, acho que vamos encerrando por aqui. Bom, nosso agradecimento mais uma vez à presença do professor Roberts e de todos os que estiveram acompanhando conosco a transmissão. Muito obrigada, grande abraço a todos e continuamos o evento.